Hi and hello everyone, I'm Steven, but I'm better known as Kurogane online. I am a toy photographer, a scale figure photographer who specializes in photographing large-scale anime figures like what you're looking at over here, 1x8, 1x7, 1x6 scale figures in an elaborate diorama setting and in combination with studio lights to get photography results which are very similar to digital artworks. That is my own style of figure photography. And I do have a long track record of having my photography works exhibited overseas. The most recent one being in Anime Fest in Czech Republic back in May this year. And my experience, the total amount of experience I have with figure photography is almost 9 years by now and counting. This is my first time being invited by the committee members, the organizers of Otakuthon Canada, to have a panel session with you guys, a sharing session on learning figure photography. So thank you very much for the invitation. I really do appreciate it. Unfortunately, I can't be physically there in Canada itself because flight tickets are really expensive nowadays. So I hope this video will be helpful to you guys by the end of this session. Before that, you can check out my Facebook page or my Instagram and my YouTube channel for my photography works as well as a number of tutorials you can find my YouTube channel. So do check it out. Do like and subscribe if you are interested. In order to make figure photography not seem too intimidating, I'm trying to keep today's session as beginner friendly as possible. So I won't be discussing highly technical stuff that involves photography in general. I want to make things easy to absorb and not confuse you guys or overload you guys with too much information in a single 30 or 40 minute session. So what do you need to do photography in the first place? A camera, of course. And do I need to buy a separate camera or should I stick to just my smartphone camera since smartphones are so great nowadays? Their camera quality are excellent, a very commonly asked question. So with smartphones, what you need to be aware of, you can always start learning photography with your smartphone camera, but there are several limitations that will limit your creativity and your progress. The first one being smartphones, they tend to perform very well outdoors, under natural light, under sunlight. But once you go indoors in the low light setting, even if you do have a very bright studio light, things will begin to fall apart and the image quality, the results are really not as good as dedicated cameras because, well, dedicated cameras, they have a larger camera sensor than any smartphone out there. The second one being the aperture value in smartphone cameras, otherwise known as the f value, f number, which is fixed on smartphone cameras. You can't change it at all. And that will severely affect your creative options when you do photography. You can't blur off the background in your photographs that are taken with a smartphone camera, unlike those taken with a dedicated camera. Unless you do it with software with Photoshop, of course. And lastly, you can't change the lenses on the smartphone camera. And once again, that will also severely limit your creativity. Different lenses produce different results, different effects. So, in the end, what allows you to progress as a photographer to learn more will be dedicated cameras which allow you to change lenses. Which is why I do highly recommend you to purchase a DSLR or especially a mirrorless camera. A mirrorless camera is something I would highly recommend nowadays because they are very beginner friendly, not difficult to learn how to use one, and they don't weigh much, they are easy to carry around. Lastly, if you can't afford any of the models I mentioned, you have a tighter budget, I do highly recommend that you guys check out pre-owned cameras, used cameras, especially DSLRs. They are great value. Do not discount second-hand camera gear. That is all about cameras for now. I do not want to waste too much time on that topic. You can ask additional questions in the Q&A session later. Let's focus on what actually matters. The indoor segment of figure photography. All of your dioramas, they are pointless if you don't get the lighting right. Lighting is the most important part in figure photography, in any genre of photography for the matter. So what kind of light should I buy to photograph figures? Are there highly specific, expensive studio lights which you need to purchase? The answer is no. Even a study lamp, a table lamp, can be usable for figure photography. What I would personally highly recommend is to buy something with an E27 mount. This is a universal mount. Most light bulbs you'll see in supermarkets, they come with the E27 mount. This is what the E27 mount looks like. And some light bulbs are half the size of this one. They can be very small. Of course, even very large ones do exist as well, but this will not fit on this lamp, of course. So with E27, they come in various sizes and shapes, so you can just go for whichever you prefer. And the most important part is whenever you can, buy the brightest light bulb you can find, the higher wattage ones, because in case you need a brighter light source, you won't be able to make a dim light bulb brighter. But if you do not need that much light, you can always make a bright bulb much dimmer by putting diffusers in front to darken that light you are using. I shall discuss about diffusers in a second. Another option is to go for LED lights. For example, this one right here. This is LED, and LEDs can be very bright. As you can see, this is a very bright LED, and this light over here cost me about 10 or 15 Canadian dollars. Very affordable. So how many lights do you need to photograph figures? One is not enough. 2 is the minimum. 2 lights is the minimum. Preferably, you should own 3 or 4 lights even. The reason being, you need to remember, wherever there is light, there will be shadows. So if I were to blast this light at this direction, one side of the figure will be bright, but the other side will be dark shadows. So you will need at least a second light from the other direction just to light up the figure properly. Some highly complex figures or figures with very dynamic poses, they might even require 3 or 4 lights just for photography. So no two figures are alike. You need to experiment with different angles and directions of your light source and see which produces the best result. You need to spend time with trial and error in order to identify what is the best lighting setup for each figure. Now that you have purchased several of these lights to photograph a figure, but if you were to blast this light directly on the figure without any control whatsoever, you are not going to get any decent results, which is where lighting modifiers come in. A lighting modifier is a filter in front of your light source, or it can be placed elsewhere nearby in order to control and shape the light to produce a more natural looking result. The most common lighting modifier, and one that is compulsory, is a diffuser. Just look around you, any photographers who may be photographing cosplayers, and if they are using a flash on top of the camera, there might be a plastic cap in front of the flash, a white opaque plastic cap. That is a diffuser for a camera flash, and it is meant to produce a more natural looking result when you fire a camera flash on a human being. So how do you use a diffuser on an LED light, a constant light like this? Even a simple sheet of white paper can make a huge difference, and let me show you guys an example right now. So as you can see, the figure is too bright, but just having a single sheet of paper in front makes a huge difference. The light now appears much softer because this paper over here is acting as a diffuser, and this shows how important diffusers are. And this is also why I told you guys to buy a light that is as bright as possible, because if you were to buy a light bulb that is too dim to begin with, once you place a diffuser, your light might end up a bit too dark to your liking. So you can buy a very bright light source, and then if it is too bright, you just add one diffuser. Still too bright, you add a second layer. So other than a sheet of white paper, what else can you use as a diffuser? Tissue paper works as a diffuser. White cloth works as a diffuser. Or you can purchase this. This is what we call a soft box. They come in various sizes and shapes. This is something meant for camera flashes, but they are universal, so you can even strap it in front of any lamp, as you can see over here. So the purpose of a soft box is to soften a light source. Of course, the effect you're looking at over here is not as prominent as that sheet of white paper just now. So to get a more softer effect than what you're looking at over here, you need something larger to distribute the light evenly across a larger surface area. One of the more common soft boxes you'll see, they are in rectangular shape. This one just happens to be an octagonal one. A reflector is also an essential piece of lighting modifier. Used in combination with a diffuser, you can get very nice results. All you need to do is to fire a light source onto a very reflective surface and redirect that reflected light onto the figure. Normally what we do is that if the light is coming from one direction and the other side is too dark, that is where you can also consider using a reflector instead of adding a second light on the other side. And a reflector can be any reflective material. It can be a silver foil or the aluminium foil, the kitchen foil you use for cooking, or even a mirror itself. With mirrors, there are two ways of using it. When you buy a cosmetic mirror, there are two sides. One is a normal mirror and the other one is like a magnifying glass, a convex mirror. So they produce different results. A flat or normal mirror, they tend to produce a more even, softer reflection, while a convex mirror, a magnifying mirror, will produce a more intense beam of light when it reflects light from a lamp. So it depends on how you plan to make creative use of that. The next lighting modifier is more of a creative one, color gels. What you're looking at over here, these are for camera flashes, but once again, you can use them on LED lights, table lights. For example, you just tape them in front and you can introduce colors into your photographs. For example, you have a pair of normal lights that hits your figure and you use a third light for the background, and you can add color to your background by making use of color gels. Objects like lantern papers or glass papers, they can also be used as color gels. You can find these in stationery stores. The next lighting modifier is a snoot. This is what a snoot for a camera flash looks like. And the very purpose of a snoot is to narrow a light beam. If I were to turn on this light and the light will spread over a very large area, but a snoot will allow me to narrow the light beam into a smaller area. For example, you want the figure to be bright, but you want your background to be darker. So you do not want the light to spill into the background. This is where a snoot comes in. And basically, a snoot is just a very fancy term for a tube that limits the spread of a light to a smaller area. You do not necessarily need to purchase something like this to use on your table lamps, on your lights. You can just go for a DIY solution. Just get a black sheet of paper and you roll it into a tube and put it in front of your light. That also works. The next one is the slit lighting modifier, which has a very similar function as the snoot. What you basically do is to grab a sheet of cardboard and you make a narrow cutout in the middle, long and narrow cutout, and you place it in front of your light source. Doing so will narrow the light beam so much that it only hits the figure and nowhere else in the scene. This is very useful for dioramas. For example, your diorama is that of a night scene and you want the figure to be the only one that is bright enough. The background needs to be dark. This is where slit lighting comes in, very helpful. So This is what I meant by controlling your light and shaping your light. The last lighting modifier that is fairly common is a light box or a light tent. So this is something mainly used by product photographers. For example, all of the official product photos you see from figure companies, those photos, those figures, they are photographed inside a light tent. The result is a very flat looking image just for maximum clarity, but the photographs tend to be a bit boring. So a light box or light tent is not something I would recommend to any toy photographer who wants to get creative. It really restricts your creativity because light sources are coming from all directions at equal intensities, so the resulting photo appears to be rather flat and boring to look at. A very essential piece of equipment or accessory you should add to your camera is the tripod. I myself almost never photograph my figures, my dioramas without a tripod supporting my camera. While there is nothing wrong with photographing handheld, a tripod allows for more stable shooting and you can potentially get higher quality photos and avoid what we call the camera shake blur, otherwise known as a blur, due to a slow shutter speed and no stabilization to avoid that. So with a tripod, what you can do is to mount a camera on the tripod and then you adjust your focus until it is spot on, and you put on a 5-second timer and let the camera shoot uninterrupted by your hands or any other moving objects, and this guarantees a higher quality photograph. So if a tripod is so important, what should I look out for when I'm buying a tripod? And there is only one thing really you need to look out for. If you were to buy a camera and you were given a free tripod as a free gift from the camera store, most likely that is not a very good tripod, and I would advise you to avoid it and buy something a little bit better, but at the same time it does not have to be very expensive. A decent tripod will cost you around 50 to 80 Canadian dollars. You can find something really good at that price range, and the only thing you need to look out for is, well, a ball head. This is a ball head for a tripod, and this is what it looks like. So a ball head is the most versatile type of tripod head you can go for, and as long as it is fully built from steel, from metal, you are all good to go using that tripod for figure photography in general. One last important part with photography is editing. You should not neglect editing at all. Yes, I'm referring to Photoshop. Photoshopping your photographs is not cheating at all, and it is a main part, a core of digital photography itself. Sometimes you might have noticed where your smartphone camera photos might appear to be much better looking than even a photograph from a DSLR or a dedicated camera, and the reason for that is because your smartphone has artificial intelligence built in, AI software, and within the split of a second you took a photo, this AI software will automatically edit the photograph for you. Dedicated cameras, they do not do that. You need to edit the photographs on your own. So at first glance, sometimes photographs coming from dedicated cameras might not appear as vibrant or as saturated in colors compared to smartphone photos, because you really need to do the editing on your own. You need to photograph in RAW format, not JPEG, not JPG, and edit those RAW photos in Photoshop or Lightroom or any software you prefer, because this will allow you to get the maximum potential of your photographs. RAW format photographs, they contain a lot more data than a simple JPEG image does. So to learn how to edit your RAW photographs from a camera. We are actually now at the end of the indoor segment of toy and figure photography tutorials, but I know that you guys might be interested in the diorama and props part which I do for my photography, which I am unable to cover in today's video, today's panel due to time constraints. But at least I can afford to give you guys a bit of quick tips on how to be more resourceful in looking for parts to support your figure photography. The first one being you need to visit gift stores, gardening supply stores regularly if you can, because you might come across something that is helpful for figure photography. For example, these two objects over here, yeah, this looks like a cabinet or a closet, and this is a retro radio. These are things you can use alongside your figures as dioramas supporting props, but they are actually coin boxes which I bought from a gift store. I just happened to come across them, so do not neglect visiting gift stores from time to time. And then yeah, this bench over here, this is a bench meant for potted plants, which I bought from a gardening store for not much, but very self-explanatory. You can use it as a desk for scale figures. So yeah, do visit stores and just look around. You might come across something very nice or useful for figure photography. Another example would be this dish rack over here. I converted it into some kind of a chamber for this figure of Miku. So you can always convert daily household items, household furniture into props for figure photography. You just need to be more creative and more resourceful. You can also look for third-party Barbie furniture, doll furniture, and spray paint them, repaint them to use as props for your figure photography. Of course, handcrafting might become important and essential. You need to buy plywood, plastic, foam boards, and so on to make props for figure photography as well. Or you can invest in 3D printing if you're interested in that sort of thing. So that is all for the indoor segment of figure photography. We shall move on to the outdoor segment. Bringing your figures outdoors to photograph them is a different challenge altogether, because it can be risky in the sense that you might accidentally damage or scratch your figures, or, well, you might lose smaller parts if you're not careful enough. But with a few preparations and precautions taken, you can still bring your figures outside to photograph them in a rather safe manner, and I'm here to give you guys 10 tips on photographing your figures outdoors. The very first tip is to scout for locations, hunting for locations, and it can be done in front of a computer. All you need to do is to open up Google Maps or Google Earth, browse around the street views, photographs of interesting locations, and you might be able to identify a few potential spots for figure photography. But even more importantly, after you have identified those locations in front of a computer, you need to pay those locations an actual visit just to look around the local landscape and identify any dangers or unsuspected elements you might need to face before you can photograph your figures there. The second tip is to check for the weather, the sea tides, and other elements related to nature. This is common sense. Check the weather forecast before you go out. And if you're going to a beach, the sea tide can be important because you do not want a high sea tide. You can't do much with a high sea tide, especially if you intend to involve water in your figure photography. A sea tide will wash your figure away, or even worse, accidentally damage your camera. Salt water is highly corrosive to electronics. A low sea tide is ideal for figure photography, and if you are adventurous enough to involve water, a calm water surface, which is what you see during a low sea tide, can produce amazing reflections, and the results of your photography can be rather rewarding. Tip number 3, timing of the day. This is extremely important, and also in combination with the previous tip on weather. To give you guys an example, the midday afternoon sun, especially without any clouds, that is the worst possible timing to photograph anything including figures. You will just get very strong highlights and dark shadows, and that is beyond fixable in Photoshop. Even Photoshop cannot help you with that. Your photographs will just look terrible. A very cloudy day is ideal for photographing figures outdoors because the clouds will act as a natural diffuser for the sunlight, and your photographs will look very natural without much effort. So a cloudy day and under a shade is the best way to photograph outdoors, except you are aiming for the sunrise or the sunset, which is known as the golden hours in photography. So, if you want to capture the sunrise or sunset together with your figure, you want to combine figure photography with landscape photography, then ideally you will want a weather that is not too cloudy. So in the end, it really depends on your goals, what you are going for. If you want to combine scenery, landscape, sunsets with a figure, then yes, you need to go for clearer weather instead of a cloudy weather. If you are patient enough to wait for the right timing of the day, combine it with the best weather possible and the right level of sea tide, you can get extremely amazing results when you combine figure photography with landscape photography. Tip number 4, go as low as possible. That is the only way to make your figure look convincingly life-sized as if it is an actual human being when you compare it to all of the real-life objects in the background. In this example of mine, my camera is barely an inch above the water surface, and that is seawater, salt water. So this is how low you need to go in order to get a convincing photograph of a figurine outdoors. Even a smartphone tripod like this one over here, this mini tripod, this is still not low enough. You need to go lower than that. So how do you go low enough other than lying on the ground with your camera? This brings us to tip number 5. Once again, tripod. Tripod is essential not only indoors but also outdoors. But in this particular case, you will want a tripod with a center column that can be removed. If you remove the center column of the tripod and insert it from the bottom instead, you will be able to mount your camera as low as possible to the ground. But the side effect of doing so is that your camera will be upside down and it is difficult to operate a camera in that position. It will require some practice and muscle memory to do so. One way to get around this problem is to purchase a camera cage for your camera, which will cost you about $60 to $100 depending on which camera model the cage is for, but a cage will allow you to mount a camera upright and as low as possible to the ground at the same time. So it is worth considering. Tip number 6 will be about hiding the base. This is one of the most challenging parts about photographing a figure outdoors, where skilled figures are unable to stand on their own without the base. But at the same time, if you don't keep the figure upright and stable, the figure might fall over and end up with some scratches. You don't want that to happen. So one way to do it is to hide the base, especially if you are photographing on a beach. Just plug the figure into the base as usual and then you bury the base portion in the sand. If you are concerned about scratching the base, then wrap the base in plastic before you bury it. That is the best way to do it. If you are photographing on grass, then perhaps you can buy some artificial grass from the gardening store and then you cut a hole in the middle of the grass. You can hide the base that way by putting the grass on top of the figure base. What if you are photographing on a solid ground where you can't just dig a hole unlike what you can on the beach in the sand? This brings us to tip number 7, supporting props, assisting props. So you need to bring some additional objects to help your figure stand without the base. In this example of mine, Master Artoria over here, all I needed to do is to bring this bicycle along. This is a 1x8 scale bicycle I bought from a gift store. I just happened to come across one. And all I needed to do is to place this bicycle next to the figure, and the figure is technically leaning against the bicycle, and that is more than enough to keep the figure standing without her base. In order to photograph this figure of Anna Medusa from Fate's Grand Order, I even went to the extent of 3D printing a huge body of Gorgon, which in total weighs over 10 kilo, and drag it over to the beach just to photograph this figure with that part in reference to the anime she originated from. So this is what I mean by assisting props. You bring additional objects along with you, which helps a figure to stand without the base in any way possible. It can be something you purchased from a shop. It can be something you made on your own. It can be a custom base. Anything else you can think of that blends in with the environment you're going to photograph the figure in. Tip number 8, reflectors. These are not just for indoors. You can use them outdoors as well, but do not use a mirror outdoor because a mirror is way too reflective. You will want to bring some aluminium foil instead if you need a reflector outdoors, especially in scenarios where the background is too bright and the figure in front is very dark, a backlit situation. Then you might want to consider using reflectors. Tip number 9, the HDR, otherwise known as the high dynamic range photograph. This is an editing method in Photoshop, but before you can even do that, you need to make some preparations during the photography process itself. You will need to take several shots of the same exact photograph, but from very dark to very bright, from underexposed to overexposed, and then you stack them together in Photoshop or Lightroom later, and that is how you get HDR photographs. This is normally used for sunrise or sunset and landscape photographs. You might want to try it. Tip number 10, the last tip, once again is the same as indoors. Do not neglect your editing in Photoshop or Lightroom, and please do photograph in RAW format. This is even more important when you are shooting outdoors. So that is all the 10 tips I can offer you guys for outdoor photography. Hopefully it is not too technical and helpful to you guys. And we have come to the end of today's panel session on toy photography, figure photography. I've tried my very best to avoid being too technical, which is why I did not discuss about camera lenses, what lenses to buy, or camera settings such as ISO value, aperture value, shutter speed. I did not mention all these things because these are the more technical stuff and you can learn them online. There are a lot of resources online. All these rules, camera setting rules, they are the same no matter what kind of photography you are doing. Toy photography, portrait photography, landscape, or anything else. So I did not want to touch on that. But anyways, in a Q&A session later, feel free to ask any questions, whether it is beginner level or advanced level, and I will try my very best to answer you guys. Also, this video, this panel session you are watching right now will be uploaded to my YouTube channel, so you get to watch it over again in case you have missed out on some things or you are unable to catch everything I have said. It is about 5 AM now in the morning I'm recording this thing, so yeah, I'm quite exhausted. But thank you very much for watching, and of course, feel free to ask any questions. You can drop your questions in my YouTube channel as well in this video's comments section. And I shall see you guys again soon, hopefully next year. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you guys again soon. Goodbye.